Welcome to part 4 of our series about demystifying strategic planning. In today's episode, we're talking about once we know where we want to go as a business, how do we get there? Ron talks about the benefit of setting aside clear time to think about strategy on a weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis, and we discuss the advantage of developing a one-page strategic plan. Well, welcome to the Business Builders Podcast. We are your hosts. I am Brenton Galland.
And I'm Ron Tomlin.
And Ron, again, it's great to be back here on our series about demystifying strategic planning.
Yes, it is. And we're keeping to our schedule. I'm very impressed.
Well, actually, we started right at the beginning. We said that everyone just wants to jump into the strategy part, and that's where we're at today.
Yes.
So why have we waited so long, Ron, to get to the part where we're actually doing the strategy?
Well, because you can't actually do the strategy until you've answered the first two questions, where are we now and where do we want to be?
And on that, we probably should just review what those questions were. So what were the 4+1 questions?
The first question, where are we now?
Yes.
Second question, where do we want to be?
Yes.
Third question, how do we get there?
Yes.
Fourth question, how will we know when we've arrived?
And the plus one?
And the plus one is, why are we doing this in the first place?
Correct. And so today we're on the how do we get there part, which really is the exciting part that we talked about everyone wants to jump into first.
Everyone wants to talk about strategy, and it's probably the most misunderstood and overused term in the business lexicon.
Fair enough. Everyone wants to be a strategist, I think.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's a nice title to have on your business card, yeah?
It sounds very impressive.
That's right. So look, before we jump into things, and we're going to keep today efficient because we've got a lot to talk about, we'll just talk about our sponsors. And so our first sponsor, Ron, is...
Borough Markets.
Borough Markets, yes. And what do?
No, you can tell me what they do.
Borough Markets, they help you market yourself online. And if you want to get some help with artificial intelligence helping you to find the right market, then Borough Markets are the right people to talk to. That's www.boroughmarkets.com.au, spelt BOROUGH. See, there you go. That's what they do. And they've given us this great podcast studio.
Fantastic. And there's SA Business Builders.
Oh, you can tell us about them.
Okay, so that's a network of people interested in building their businesses by doing what I'd call real networking, which is about building relationships with people so that they feel comfortable doing business together in South Australia.
Great. And our first event for 2022 happens in early April, and everyone will be finding out about that soon. It's pretty exciting because we've got a bunch of young guns helping us with this one, Ron.
Fantastic.
Excellent.
I love the term young guns because I hate guns and I'm not there anymore. So fantastic.
Fair enough. Well, we've had some debate about where the age cuts off for a young gun. So I think
it ain't me. I can tell you that much.
I think we've come to the 35-year-old age group. Below that, you're a young gun. Above that, you're experienced.
Fantastic.
I'm not saying people under 35 aren't experienced. It's just a kind way of saying that you're not a young gun anymore.
Oh, fantastic.
I think they do.
I feel comfortable with not being a young gun anymore.
Well, they do the what is it, the 40 under 40 or the awards for people under 40 who've done really great things in business. I think maybe we should say 40 is the cutoff then.
Maybe.
So if you're 39, you're still a young gun.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah, fair enough. And our last sponsor is, of course, Adaptco, and that's my business. And so I come in and do outsourced marketing for people as a CMO in their businesses and really help them get from point A to point B based on what their strategy is. Funnily enough, we're talking about strategy today, Ron.
Yeah, and hopefully demystifying some of that.
Okay, so let's get into our topic today, okay? So we're talking today about the question, how do we get to where we want to go? And we've already established in the last episode, so if you haven't listened to it, listen to the last 3 episodes, but particularly the last episode.
And I just want to say, I want to recap a little bit.
Yeah.
We've spent time thinking about the DNA of the organization, which is its values, its purpose, and articulated a shared vision for what we want to achieve in the future at a certain point in time. So where we want to be. We fleshed that out with objectives to be very clear about where we want to be really means and what we need to do to make that vision or what we have to have had achieved to make that vision a reality.
Yes.
Only at that point, when you can answer those two things about looking at where we are now and where we want to be, can you even start thinking about how we're going to get there? And that's what strategy is all about.
Correct. And we've been using a map analogy the whole time.
I love that because until you determine where you start from,
Point of origin.
and where you want to be, the destination, it's useless to talk about what route we're going to take or what vehicle we're going to use, because without those 2 points, it just doesn't make any sense.
Right. So, in just paraphrasing what you're saying, we're saying there's a bunch of really hard work to do, which doesn't have to be hard. It's just time consuming, and it involves thought and proper consideration and research to really understand the foundational things that, in a sense, will form the framework for the decisions we're going to make moving forward. Now, you and I were talking earlier, and we were talking about a definition for strategy. So we might actually start there, because, what does strategy really mean, Ron?
As I said, it's used in so many different ways, and it's overused, and people love the term strategic. They put strategic against everything because it makes it sound more impressive. Strategy in its raw form, and you can look up definitions of strategy, Google it, I don't care. How do we deploy the resources of the organization to achieve its objectives? Now, if you use that as a term for strategy, it's how do we get there? Okay, it's dependent on having objectives in the first place. So you can't develop a strategy unless you have objectives.
It's also dependent on having resources in the first place, because you're saying, how do we deploy the resources we've got?
Well, understanding your resources.
Yes.
The resources you have now and the resources that you will need in order to get where you want to be.
So if we're taking this back to the map analogy, how does that then look?
Okay, so yeah, I love that. The map analogy, the objectives and the vision define the definition or the destination of the organization.
Yeah.
The strategy defines, if you like, the route that we're going to take.
Yes.
And that but supporting that is the mode of transport that you use.
Yeah. So are we going to go on a plane? Are we going to drive a Mini? Are we going to drive a full drive? Blah, blah, blah. Are we going to go on the bus?
Yes. So strategy involves all those things about making decisions on what mechanism or what things we're going to need in order to get there.
And so the things we're going to need are things like resources, like what do we have at our disposal to help us get there? So again, you might choose to fly if you've got enough resource. And obviously that's getting a bit cheaper today with the price of petrol. It's cheaper to fly to Bali than it is to fill up your tank of gas.
And rarely do you do it all by yourself as a person. So you have other people who are involved in this. And what sort of skills and capabilities do they have?
Yeah.
And what processes does the organization use in order to fulfill its objectives? And that's about how does it deliver value to its customers.
Yep. So we know where we want to go. The resources then become, part of that framework for making the decision about what mode of transport we're going to use and the, how we're going to approach the route we're going to take. Is it going to be this way or that way, etc.
And I separate the route from the mode of transport and all those other decisions that we have to make, because when people talk about business strategy, they often talk about one area in particular, which is operating in the marketplace. How do we operate in the marketplace? How do we compete against our competitors? How do we deliver value to customers? That's the focus of a lot of discussion about business strategy.
And in my view, that's almost like the route.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But there's also questions about finance, because if we remember the balanced scorecard approach is there are financial objectives, which is what the owners are interested in. There are market and customer objectives, which is what we were just talking about. There are business process objectives, which is how do we provide value to customers through the processes of delivering to our customers. And the final one is the growth and people aspect of the organization. Those objectives are about how do we develop the capabilities to deliver better processes, to operate in the marketplace more effectively, to be able to deliver the financial objectives of the owners. Okay, so it's structured, it's hierarchical.
Yeah.
Now, what's really important is when you look at the marketing part of it, the route, and that's why I use that term as separate from the other decisions. People like Michael Porter, and it's stood the test of time, suggested there were really only 3 strategies available to organizations. Number one, this was in his 3 generic strategies treatise. Number one was cost leadership.
Yes.
Now, first thing that needs to be identified here, cost leadership is not about cost to the organization, it's cost to the customer.
Yes.
So you could call it price leadership.
Yeah.
And that's a very valid strategy. And a lot of organizations thrive on that.
And that we say, is that just lowest price though? Is that what you're talking about? Or because price can be, a strategy can be to be a higher price.
Oh, yeah. But then we're talking about something different.
Okay.
This is price leadership. In other words, I'm going to be the lowest price in the marketplace. I'm going to be the leader in that area. And you've got to think about price in terms of what people expend to get the value that they're looking for.
So I think about price. I think about people like Bunnings.
Yeah. Oh,
Lowest price is guaranteed.
Yeah, absolutely. But price can be about other things rather than just dollars.
Right.
Because when I consume a product or I purchase a product, I have to expend a whole bunch of different things. There's dollars, question. There's time, there's energy, and there's all sorts of different forms of energy, right? I might expend energy in terms of thinking. I might expend energy in terms of emotions. I might expend energy in terms of my feelings. So all of those things need to be considered. As an example, time nowadays is really valuable to people.
Absolutely.
And so if I can provide same value with you having to expend less time to get that value, then isn't that a lower price?
Yes, because it requires less energy on our behalf to acquire what it is we want.
Absolutely. And that's sort of the definition of value. Definition of value, very simple. Value equals what I put in, or what I get out minus what I put in. And what I put in is all the things like dollars, time, energy, etc. Benefits, well, I've got to think about what I'm getting out of this. And we do those value equations in our head as consumers all the time. I might find that, for the sake of argument, I'm looking for a pen and I want to buy 100 of them. And I can buy it down at a local store, which is a walking distance from my office, for $1 a piece. So I'm going to spend $100. I might find that actually I can get that pen at a store 5 kilometers away for 70 cents. So I'm now going to spend $70 for 100. But I've got to get the time to get into the car. I've got to spend the petrol to get there. I've got to find this place. I've got to navigate the store itself and find out where this bargain is. All of that is energy that I've got to expend.
So it's a convenience factor.
Well, convenience is all about what value is there in
it for me. That's why people like Uber Eats are doing so well, because people don't want to get off the couch.
Okay, so we could go down this rabbit burrow. We could go down this rabbit burrow for a long time, talking about the concept of price leadership or cost leadership.
Okay, so we've got that. That's one strategy that Michael was talking about, Michael Porter.
Second strategy available to people in the marketplace area, and this is of the balanced scorecard, is differentiation. How am I different from my competitors? On what basis do I provide more value because of who I am and the way I deliver the services of the product? And there's a whole bunch of bases for differentiation that exist. It could be differentiation on the basis of location. I'm the best in this area. It could be differentiation on the basis of the skills of my people. I've got the smartest people. It could be differentiation on the basis of exclusivity. Nobody else has what I have. There's a whole bunch of bases, and you can look this up in books to the nth degree, especially books on marketing.
Yes.
The third is focus.
Right.
And this is saying, you know what? I'm not going to try and provide services across the marketplace. I'm going to become very specific about the customers and the segment of the market that really values what I do.
Yes.
And I'm going to understand that segment, and no one's going to understand it like I do.
Yes.
And I'm going to provide value on the basis of what that segment of the market really wants.
Yeah.
And you can do that then on the basis of focusing to be a lower price or focusing to be different.
Or a bespoke service.
Yeah, well, that's what a bespoke service really means. So there's really only 3 generic strategies. And a lot of people have talked about, now there's a different format for the strategies. Wierdsma came up with things like customer intimacy and so on. When you delve down into them, it's the same thing. Customer intimacy equates to focus, quite frankly. So this is stood the test of time. So it's worth thinking in that area of the marketplace, the customer, it's worth thinking about what strategy am I going to pursue? Now, that's not the only strategy that you need to think about, but it's the strategy that sort of links everything together because You are operating in the marketplace for the purpose of providing customer value.
Well, this is the key thing that people need to decide, because everything else we've talked about falls off the back of that. So we've decided where we are, we've decided where we're going, and this is how we operate in the marketplace. So like you said earlier, this is the route we're going to go along.
Yeah.
So things that influence that, of course, are like we talked about earlier, what kind of resources do we have, and, what's our mode of transport? But that almost talks about volume of, how we're going to approach this strategy that we choose.
Yeah, it is central, because it is the one thing that's outside the organization. Well, not really. I mean, things like access to capital and so on are outside the organization as well, but they're dependent on how the organization looks and operates according to financiers.
Okay. So when we're deciding how we're going to get to where we're going to go, in other words, we're really looking at the strategy part now after making decisions about, where we are, where we're going to go. We really have, in basic terms, 3 key strategies that we can choose from.
In terms of how we operate in the marketplace, how we operate. Now, there's also financial strategies. How do we access the capital we need to be able to do that? There's the business processes of the organization.
And I might just stop you there, but that breaks down, like if we're looking at strategy, there's what we do in the marketplace, and then there's what we got to do in our business to facilitate
absolutely
what we want to do in the marketplace.
Yeah.
So what you're talking about now is what we need to do in the business to facilitate the path we've chosen to take
in the marketplace. Absolutely right. And that's why I loved the way you articulated this idea between the route, which is the business strategy, how we operate in the marketplace, and the mode of transport.
Yeah.
And those other decisions.
Yeah.
And it is an iterative process, because we might say, for the sake of argument, that we're going to choose a cost leadership strategy, which means we have to develop have machines do a lot of our production. We don't have those machines at the moment, so we have to have access to capital, and we have certain machines at the moment that are not that fantastic. So we might say, okay, well, we'd like to be there, but it's going to be outside the time frame that we're talking about. So we might need to change. It's like saying, okay, if I decide that I've got a 4-wheel drive available to me to get to Sydney.
Yeah, we can go over Roxon Creek and Dale.
And we can go through the Simpson Desert and all that sort of fun stuff. But if I've only got a mini miner available to me,
that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm kind of constrained to bitumen roads.
Yeah.
Okay, so my route has to change according to what resources. I might decide along the way, using that analogy to the nth degree, I will get to Broken Hill, right, in my Mini, which is all paved. And then in Broken Hill, I'm going to buy a 4-wheel drive, and I can get to Sydney any way I want now. I can go 4-wheel driving along the way, because now I have extra resources that I didn't have before.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So it's the same sort of thing. We have to decide what sort of resources we need to acquire along the way, which has some financial implications and so on.
And I think one thing it's probably worth talking about is like this level of strategy is pretty high level, right? Because
absolutely,
when we choose these things and we as directors or business owners or boards or whoever the group is that's controlling these strategic decisions, we will put these things in place, but then it comes down to our people and the skills and the resources within the business to then put flesh on the bones of those strategies and go, right, this is how we're going to fulfill that.
Yeah, and this is the relationship between the strategic plan, which is usually, not always, I mean, people had to start developing strategic plans that were only 3 months long during as an example, during the pandemic, because the environment was so unreliable and so changeable, and it had significant impacts on the business.
Yep.
But usually strategic plans occupy multiple years.
Yep.
So the relationship between the strategic plan and the annual business plan is that the strategic plan informs long-term what we intend to do by a certain point in time. Yep. And then annually, how are we going to achieve the first step towards that plan?
Yeah, and usually when you create the strategic plan, that business plan you're talking about then becomes off as a backbone, right? Here's how we're going to put it into play. And
it's all about actions. And, I like to have a format where you talk about the objectives, they stay.
Yep. So we've already talked about that in the last episode.
The strategies stay pretty much the same. They rarely change unless the environment changes significantly. But then the actions for the year will be dependent on where we are along the route. Okay, so they are very much informed by what we're talking about today, which is the strategy, and what we're going to be talking about next time, which is how will we know how far we are along the way, and how will we know when we've arrived?
Yeah, great.
So they're the indicators.
So in recap, when we're looking at strategy, based on what we've been talking about today, there's a couple of major decisions we need to make, which is, about how we're going to operate in the market, or back to our map analogy, the route we're going to choose. And there's, from Michael Porter methodology, there's 3 key areas or 3 key strategies we can choose.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we've chosen that, and it's also influenced by this, we then need to look at in the business, or what's our mode of transport, the vehicle, how are we going to, make this journey. So what do we need to do in the business in a few key areas? And that might be sales and marketing. It might be the finance area. It might be the people area, and it might be the business processes area. So those things need to then have strategies in play to be able to fulfill what we want to do in the market. And once we've done all of that, we've pretty much got made those decisions, because strategies really are about making decisions, as you talked earlier, about how we're going to deploy the resources that we have to get to where we want to go. And then we've basically got our strategy put together.
Yep.
Yes?
Yep. And it should stop at that point. It should be high level. It shouldn't confuse, we're going to develop this brochure, or we're going to undertake a revamp of this website. That's detailed. It sits way below.
From my experience, a lot of people want to drum into that detail straight away, because I remember even with one business that I've been working with, we've been talking about, business processes and what we're going to do. And their immediate question is, what software are we going to use with that? And I'm like, hold the bus. We need to really understand what we're going to do, and that will form the brief.
Absolutely. And so strategic planning sits at that higher level that talks about major decisions on resource allocation for the organization and how we're going to deploy those resources.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's why it's called strategic.
And the actual business plan sits separate to that, which we can address another time after we've finished this series.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the next level down. It's about the implementation, which is absolutely critical. But you can't get to the point of implementation until you know what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Right. And I think that's a really good place to resolve this podcast that we're doing at the moment, is really talking about this is the high level decisions.
Yes.
And then it's up to our resources, our team, and the other people in the business to then help us put flesh on those bones. So that's when we engage the sales and marketing team, or we engage the CM, the CFO, or the accounts people, or the HR people, or whatever structure we've got in the business, whether it's a GM.
Yeah. And those are the teams whose plans themselves are informed by the strategic plan of the organization.
So just out of interest, if you're a business because I think people listening, we've got all sorts of different businesses. So if you're a business owner and you're on your own in making all these kind of decisions, and then you've got a team, which is a lot of businesses, that differs to if you've got, a management team and directors who can run these sessions together. And most strategic planning sessions I've seen that work really well, you have an outside facilitator come in, because they ask the questions that get all the right bits of information on the table. So my question, just in finishing, is if you're a business owner in your own business versus, a directorship, how would you handle strategic planning differently?
Well, for individual business owners, it's going through the process and asking yourself the questions, right? And getting used to asking yourself the questions. It's no different really, except for the fact that you don't have to communicate it to anyone.
And who's your strategic planning team though? Because a strategic plan you can do on your own, but it's often good to bounce it off people.
Oh, look, it's a great idea to have other people, specifically things like advisory boards or just customer groups or suppliers, to bounce ideas off of. But at the end of the day, it's going to, you don't have to communicate a lot, because quite frankly, it's you.
But strategies need to be tested.
Strategies are tested in the marketplace. The thinking behind strategies need to be tested.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah. And that's where you can bounce ideas off other people. And the more people you do, the more, people talk about commercial and confidence. You've got to take that into consideration. But the more people you bounce it off, you'll get perspectives. Quite frankly, this is why I run tech groups or groups like that, because it gives people perspectives from outside their organization, which is fantastic, because it's easy to sort of start drinking, as the Americans say, start drinking your own Kool-Aid, believing your own rhetoric.
Well, what I really like about tech in your kind of scenario is that you've got other business owners who are in the same position as you who can actually bounce ideas off of. So if you were doing strategic planning, you can test it out with other business owners who might run businesses that are completely different to yours, but they're in the same seniority level and the same responsibility level as you. And that becomes really valuable to have that kind of a think tank around you.
Absolutely. And quite frankly, we do that. Different people host and they present their strategic plan to the group. The idea behind that is the group is their litmus test. The group is their, what are you doing? Asking the questions. Why are you doing it this way? Why do you think of going down that path? Why are you looking at that marketplace? Asking the questions that really we should be asking ourselves, but it's good to have someone else outside looking in.
Yep.
People who can see the wood for the trees, as the saying goes.
And if I was going to invest in anything as a business owner, and I have, it's always been getting that outside perspective when we're looking at the strategy stuff, because that's where it's really important to help with those decisions, because sometimes you can be just too close to it. So always getting people to be involved in helping you think through the strategy, I think, is a valuable and a wise thing, as long as they're the right people. And that becomes a choice.
Absolutely, to my way of thinking, critical, but there's so many people who don't do it.
Okay, and to finish off, I might do something a bit different, Ron. What would your advice be to business people out there who are about to, start getting stuck into the strategy thinking within their businesses? Now, we know that people do strategy at all different points of the year, but what would you say to people who are getting ready for strategy now?
Find space in your day or your week or your month to be thinking about this on an ongoing basis. Don't do it as a one-off and think it's going to last forever, because it doesn't. Also, and this is the hard part, and why people often get people around them as they build their business to take away the tasks that make this difficult. You need to have that space. I remember one guy in one of my groups, I was talking to him about developing a strategic plan. And I said, look, you're going to need about a day. He wasn't going to involve any of his other people. He wanted to do it himself as a first pass. I said, you're going to need about a day. The next time we got together, he proudly showed me his diary. He had a half an hour here and a half an hour there and an hour there and between meetings. And it added up to 8 hours over the course of a month.
I remember you talking about this at another point, and that's good thinking for someone who's busy, but it doesn't make any practical sense if you need to actually spend time ruminating on something. And
I said to him at the time, look, in that half hour, you're going to be thinking about the last meeting you were in and the meeting you're about to go in. You're not going to have the headspace to think about the important things. You really need blocks of time. So if I was giving a business owner any advice, I'd be saying to him or her, block out some time. If I was talking to larger organizations, as I do, the really important thing is to use the strategic planning process and the eventual plan as a mechanism for communicating the intent of the organization.
Yeah.
That's really critical.
And look, and I agree with all of that. And my piece of advice to people who are about to undertake business strategy is that I really would suggest that you need to be able to get your strategy on one single page. And that's a real challenge. And there's a lot of frameworks out there to do that. And the reason for that is then it becomes easier to articulate through your organization, easier to report to, because as you said, a strategy is something that you need to live and breathe, but you need to revisit it. And I think when it's on a page, it becomes a digestible piece of information that you can align your reporting to and that you can then review, whether it's quarterly, yearly, 6 monthly. It takes a lot of work to make something simple. And if you get it into a one-page format, then it's executable, because those bigger documents, where do you start? You might have action plans and so forth, but they become difficult to execute. And the one thing with strategy is doing it and then actually putting it into action, and a one-page plan helps.
And look, I'll tell you, I'll finish off with a little story. I was brought in by an organization to help them with their strategic plan. They had multiple strategic plans that they developed before, but nobody was using them in the organization because they didn't understand them. We started off the process of a strategic planning, document, or developing a document. And at the first pass of that document, people said, this is useless to us. I said, I'm a little bit sore. I thought you wanted it to be used by the organization. They said, you don't understand. It's not complicated enough. And so we decided to part company, me happily, because I could see the same problem occurring over and over again for that organization, that they were beautiful documents that no one used. And you can get gilt-edged strategic plans that are fabulous paperweights. Or great doorstops.
Yeah.
The important thing is implementation. And we'll talk about that later on.
Yeah.
And one step towards that, so it's a nice segue into next time. One step towards that is having measures that you use to identify, are we tracking along towards the objectives and the vision that we have?
Correct.
How do we know we're getting there? And how will we know when we've arrived?
And from my experience, you can put the whole lot on one page, and then that slips beautifully into the board notes, and you can report on each of the streams, or it becomes part of your induction packs.
Let's not give away all the secrets.
No, but it's just, I've seen it again and again, exactly like you're talking about. The simpler you can make it, the more high level you can make it, the more easy it is for people to digest. And then it's actionable.
It gets down to the same thing. People talk about great visions for organizations, and you think about Steve Jobs' vision, an apple on every desk.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay. Well, Ron, that was really good. A long conversation this time around, and I think it deserves it. So it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
And we will see you all in a fortnight where we're going to be talking about, Ron,
the indicators for the organization. In other words, how will we know when we've arrived?
How will we know when we've arrived? That is our next episode on the Business Builders podcast. And until then,
it's bye from me.
We've just done that.
All right.
And bye from me. So goodbye, everybody. Have a great fortnight. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye.